Hello everyone, welcome to our lounge. This is the Color and Comics stream, and I will be continuing where I left off. Actually, no, I might be doing something different, because a lot of these panels have not been inked. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start inking some panels. Should I ink them or... trying to see where I left. Last time I was inking this. So maybe I'm going to pencil. I'm gonna do this panel right here. This looks like a huge disappointment, to be honest, everyone. And I'm gonna try to revive it, bring it to life. Make it look a lot better. I am kind of set on working on with color pencils. I've just been really enjoying the process. I've been enjoying the results. Today is Wednesday, so probably either tomorrow. Well, no, not tomorrow, but Friday. I'm gonna come back to watercoloring. So today is gonna be penciling and working with color pencils, hopefully. And then Friday, I'm going to come back to watercolors. I haven't given up on them yet. I really do think a lot of it has to do with the paper. Why I'm getting disappointing results. Even though some panels did turn out pretty good, and I liked them, I still think that I could do a lot better. There was something that I wanted to discuss today, actually. And it's to do with last night's stream. I introduced to you guys Minor Threat, one of my favorite bands. And you guys heard Makai, who is the lead singer of that band, talk about just his point of views, his motivations behind his music. And I went into in-depth discussion about the importance of individualism. And I also wanted to talk about that today, and how it's also important to maintain a balance. I think that individualism is very important. It's absolutely important. But I also think that it's important to recognize the value in connecting with people as well, and or just having respect for each other despite being individualistic. Because I think that's where certain things started to turn in a negative direction, when people saw themselves as individuals and they just stopped caring about others and they just focused on themselves. And there was this I guess hyper individualism where nobody else matters but the person. I still don't think that is part of the philosophy or behind the idea. I think it just took a bad turn because of other issues. But that is something that is a bit of a concern. When people aren't looking out for each other and they're in competition with each other to prove their own individuality to others. It just becomes a really toxic form of individualism. So I think it's important to just kind of like think about these ideas, think about those concepts, and not just be dogmatic about it and just be like, okay, I'm now like always going to be individualistic about everything, and that whole thought train, right? I don't think that it becomes healthy, especially when you're up against people who are very much conformists, who are very much within this idea of like thinking, acting, and behaving like a pack, like a group. When you come across those people, or like even in the fascist regime, right? Everybody just kind of backed each other up, regardless of how wrong they were. It became this mob almost, like cult. And that becomes dangerous when people are way too individualistic, where they don't respect each other at all, and they're just like, I'm much better, or I'm just completely divided and focused on themselves. They become easily overpowered, overruled. So there's like a fine line between being like individualistic, understanding the importance of it, and being so much so that nobody else matters except yourself. So I don't think that there are any real hard rules. It's just a lot of it has to just deal with like understanding the importance of being your own person. That doesn't necessarily mean, and as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be at the expense of somebody else or in comparison to somebody else. It's just this idea that we are our own people. We are in charge of our own bodies, especially. We are in charge of our decisions, our abilities to think and rationalize things. Other people shouldn't be doing that for you, especially the older you get. The more you become an adult and the more you become independent. A lot of the thought process should come from you, and not what is popular, and not what the general opinion is, and just like following it along blindly. And that always, even in individualistic groups, even like in the punk rock movement, you had people who would come in and they would have like their opinions on things, and or they would pretend to understand what the movement was about, what the punk rock movement was about, what it all meant. And a lot of times those people will be called posers. They don't understand what it's about. They just know that, it's cool, it's popular, it's stylistic, and I'm just gonna pretend and nod along to everything because I just want to fit into it. Or in other cases where they want to sabotage it, where they just pretend like they fit in and that they're part of it all, and they start like converting people to really false ideals and concepts, or brainwashing them, or gaslighting them to think like, this is a better route, or this is what it's really about. Which again goes against the entire concept of it, is that, you're supposed to be an individual and think about things yourself and figure things out instead of following along a trend or a figure of some sort. And of course, the way that it works, the capitalist systems, and those who are capitalistic, they take what they can to monetize on it. So they would water down the entire culture and make money off of it. Make things more mainstream and then sell people these products. Like, you got people who are buying ripped up jeans that back then people just had because that's what they wore frequently, and just ripped up and was worn out, and they would sell ripped up jeans for like $200. Like, oh, here's your punk rock look. Hot Topic, for example, is one of them. So even though it did make things mainstream and more acceptable, and more people were able to understand the culture, as opposed to how it was before, it was just seen as like a huge threat to everyday people. It made it more mainstream, but it also watered down a lot of it. And a lot of posers started to show up, like people who just didn't understand a lot of it, didn't understand the values and the way people interact with each other, and they brought in a lot of like the mainstream toxic culture into it, while dressing as if though they're against it. And for those people who are just getting into it, who don't really understand much about it, they come across those who are opposing, and people with those toxic values end up making the newcomers, let's just say, believe in these toxic values. So, this is the pitfall to having it become that mainstream, and or that was the pitfall of it becoming so mainstream, is that it brought in a lot of people who just didn't appreciate or didn't really care or wanted to actually sabotage the movement by bringing in contradictory elements, like bringing in violence. That was something that wasn't idolized by punks of the time. In fact, they were trying to get away from that, and they didn't like that people were showing aggression and violence towards them because of the way that they chose to express themselves visually and so on. But as I mentioned before, like in the Minor Threat shows, when they were talking about like being straight edge and how people ended up really taking it in as like a movement, and being incredibly dogmatic about it, they started bringing in violence to prove their point. Like, they would go into shows that would smack alcohol out of people's drinks because they didn't drink, and they didn't do any of those things. So they just started to see other people as less than. And the violent types took that as an opportunity to exercise their superiority complex, basically, and they started being aggressive with people for those reasons, when really they just wanted to be aggressive with people and they needed a reason. So yeah, it just kind of spins out in a sense. The less people really start thinking about it and understanding the true ideals of it, the spirit of it all, it just becomes muddled into like just visual image. People just dressing like it. So foremost, it was really more about the philosophy than it was about anything else. It just like the visual effect, the appearance, just stemmed from wanting to just distinguish themselves from like, organized religion types and, the oppressive types, or like the fascist types, or any of that stuff. It just came about as that, as a result of that. It wasn't like I'm gonna just be trendy and look cool. In fact, it was the opposite. It wasn't cool. A lot of people thought of it as like looking ridiculous and looking strange and crazy and all that other stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to bring it up. I think it's just kind of important to highlight how it could be also really dangerous if you take it to the opposite extreme, where you're so individualistic, where other people just stop mattering more and more. And when it comes down to like having to connect and unite with each other and, push against, let's say, fascist forces or people who are threatening these individualistic and liberating ways of experiencing life, enjoying things in life of that nature, they can't, because everybody's just like, well, I'm smarter, I'm more individualistic, and I'm this great person that's incredibly different from everybody else, and so on and so forth. It becomes this really toxic cocktail in a sense. It's just kind of important to just maintain a middle ground there and just understand that, it's not always supposed to be one thing or the other, not always supposed to be collective all the time, and not always supposed to be individualistic all the time. I think it just calls for circumstance. There are certain cases where it is important to be individualistic and to explore and live life in a way that's rewarding for yourself and not constantly chasing what other people are thinking. And then there's always points where it is important to stay connected and to value other people outside of yourself, in order to also ward off these like evil behaviors and evil toxic forms of infecting basically society. The way they see each other, the way they interact with each other. And as I was mentioning, capitalism uses it to their advantage. They divide people by saying, oh, you could be even more individualistic if you do this, and you're even better than this person when you have this thing that makes you really individualistic. And people are so divided, they're so busy trying to compete and compare and outdo each other to show how individualistic and unique they are, that when it comes down to being exploited, that when it comes down to tyranny, people are too divided to even understand how to fight against it, how to go against it. So it really works out to their advantage. The more people allow themselves to become brainwashed and manipulated and be ruled by these like popularity contests and spite and jealousy and rivalry and all that other stuff. It makes things more and more toxic. And that's kind of what they want. They want you to not band together, in a sense. It's like it's always the extreme opposite, right? It's like one moment it's like, no, you have to be like everybody. And then that becomes really toxic because anything different is shunned out, or anything different is seen as a threat, or they're like, oh, this person's gonna ruin it for all of us. We've all just been living with each other peacefully. Meanwhile, they're just emulating and doing things out of fear, because if they step out of bound, then they're going to be seen as infiltrators or heretics or whatever else. And then the other hand, it's like, be individualistic, so that way when we do tend to, push towards this very controlling state, where everybody is supposed to act, think, and behave like one, you won't be able to do anything about it. You're going to be too caught up in trying to prove how unique and more important you are than others. So the whole idea of like divide and conquer, right? Divide people by playing their individualism against themselves. So it's important to just like, that's why it's important to think about things, to be able to exercise your ability to, reason and rationalize and judge situations based on your own understanding, based on your developed ability to do just those things and to genuinely understand them. As opposed to just constantly following like a dogmatic autopilot mode of behaving and thinking. I think some people just subscribe to those things because it becomes easier for them. They don't have to think. They're like, oh, I'm just going to be considered a religious person, and therefore I'm not going to have to do much more thinking. I could just go to church and pray, and that's it. But then outside of that, I'm not going to really think about any of those things. I know I've earned my rights by going to church. I've earned my freedom by saying the Hail Marys or whatever, or any other religion. It doesn't necessarily even have to be Christian. This is like something that is common in most people who are religious, is that they think because they call themselves these religious titles that they're absolving themselves of any responsibility of having to like think about how their actions day to day and how they interact with people, how they talk to people or treat people is just irrelevant at that point. It's like, yeah, I go to church, I'm a great person, but meanwhile they're being really shitty towards everybody around them all the time because they're like, now I don't have to do anything. So in any circumstances, whether it's like, punk rock scene, whether it's the religious scene that you're in, or whatever it is, the moment that you start to take on these like pilot mode behaviors, and you stop thinking for yourself, like, well, is this right? Or, let me think it through myself. Let me take time to form my own opinion about things. Anytime that is substituted by automatic behavior, it becomes really toxic. And now, with like I was talking about the idea of like posers, people who are pretending to be understanding or part of the scene, it's more and more difficult to understand, like to see which person really does connect well or understand these multiple principles and stuff, because it's just appearances could be mimicked, appearances could be emulated, and it creates this facade, so if you depend on the images, you could be disappointed in a sense, because there's always going to be somebody who is posing, basically. They're pretending to understand these things. It's not a good indication, is what I'm getting at. Like physical appearance, somebody who, like, let's say even somebody who's like religious and they're wearing religious symbols on their necks, doesn't mean that they actually follow all those things, or do all those things that religion tells people to do, or tells people to actually follow and practice. It's just there, it's something that they like, and they want to think of themselves as that type, but really it comes down to their actions, how they treat people and how they treat themselves, or how they act around other people. Do they actually end up following those things when it comes to that? And I find in a lot of cases they don't. At this point, those kind of appearances or like physical appearances just become slightly easier for you to be able to connect with like-minded people. You know, like there's a chance that you'll connect with somebody who, let's say, does dress punk rock or is part of that scene. There's more likely a chance you'll connect with them than somebody else who's a random stranger. You know, they might understand those things, but there's a heavy emphasis, especially of modern time now, of might. You know, considering that there's been years of people who are just brought on by mainstream culture to that culture, it becomes a maybe, rather than how it was back in like the 80s and 90s, where it wasn't trendy. It was just something that people liked to do, and they were kind of it was less accepted, and it was kind of dangerous also to dress and look that way, but people just did it anyways because it was a lot more close to the truth of what that movement was about than it is now. But really, all those things, everything, you know, just points to the fact that it's really about a person's values than it is anything else. You know, they might dress like it, but you get to know them, and then you find out that their values are all over the place. They don't actually believe in any of it. They just recite it by memory, but when it comes to practice and their day-to-day actions, they totally contradict all those things. And the same thing could be said for people who consider themselves religious. You know, they'll say like, oh, you know, this is wrong and this is wrong, and how could this person do that, and blah blah blah, and then they turn around and do those exact same things, and they don't care to like really monitor themselves and be like, whoops, you know, I just kind of did what I condoned other people for. You know, I'm doing that now, so was it actually right for me to, you know, condone the other person or to reprimand another person for the same thing that I'm doing right now? That's a little nuts. So yeah, even in that, you know, all those things, it just points to the fact that what really shows what kind of a person is, it's not by their appearance, it's not by the symbols that they wear, it's the consistency of their behavior, actions, and interaction. That's what really points to them, to who they really are. It's not the length of their mohawk or how many studs they're wearing, or what their cross is made out of. Or how many menorahs they have, you know, none of that. It's just those are there to just kind of remind the person themselves, like, hey, these are the values, like, remember these values. But people end up using them as like a status thing, or to signal to somebody else something, a message, or class, or whatever else, and it just totally loses its purpose. gonna skip this song. Hold on. You know, while I'm on this page, might as well try to revive it. I don't know. It looks definitely better than it did before. I'll say that. But still, I could see so many mistakes on there, you know. He's a little too long. This robe wear is a little too long. The placement of the arm here. There's some mistakes there I could see. I guess, just going back to what I was talking about earlier, I guess there's like, what I really want to say is that there is no one size fits all way of thinking and behaving. You know, you can't just be like, oh, I'm only going to be like individualistic. I'm only going to be collective. You know, I'm only going to be part of this or that. You know, those things create problems, because once that's put to the test, or once that's questioned, that's your entire reality that's being threatened, you know. So a lot of people don't react well to that. They're just like, well, it's what I believe in, you know. You're just so rather than just thinking and being like, well, I guess that doesn't make any sense, or that is really toxic, people are just like, well, no, that's just how it is, you know. It starts to veer into that territory where people start making these kind of blanket statements, so that they don't have to take the time to actually think, you know, to actually challenge these views. They're like, it's always been this way. This is my pilot mode, and you're ruining the pilot mode for me. Whereas like, well, because of your pilot mode, there's all these problems that start to come up, and it's creating a lot of problems. So yeah, just having to think and call for a reasonable solution rather than just basing it off of like, what is this what does this belief say that needs to be done? It's like, well, just think about, what does the situation really need to improve or to fix the problem? That's what I find to be the problem with a lot of these isms, like communism or capitalism and socialism or whatever. All these isms have this like kind of boxed in idea or rules, and people just go into autopilot mode with them. Like once they grasp some idea, they're just like, now I'm this. And whenever it calls for challenging scenarios or views, they just base it off of that rather than basing it off of like logic and reason and morality and, you know, understanding all those things, and also accountability. You know, how much of the things that I am holding other people hostage over am I following? Am I actually doing? You know, does it make sense to actually do that with other people if I can't even do that myself? And either start doing it yourself and really following it, or, you know, stop using that as some sort of tool to wreck other people's realities or whatever. Or at least hold yourself accountable when you do, you know, as opposed to like pretending like you don't. You got like these politicians right now who are just like chastising everybody and talking about blasphemy and this is wrong and this is wrong, and then meanwhile they're supporting like gun violence and they're enabling people who are you know, manufacturing these like killing machines and allowing them to be in schools and telling people that they should be able to walk around with them. And it's just absolutely crazy. They chastise people for this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, they're just like exploiting workers. They're exploiting people. They're exercising greed. they're manipulating others, and then they're talking about, religious values and, oh, this is immoral. Well, if it's about morality, then you should be addressing all these things that you're doing yourself. Holding yourself accountable for things if morality is the key issue or the key element to all these problems. So, and this is another example of posers, people who are just pretending like they are who they say they are, but when it comes down to actually being that, it's totally the opposite. Talk about morality and then support people who are racist. Like none of those religious texts say, yeah, it's great to be racist. It's a virtue. That's something that is heavenly. It's the complete opposite of it. But they're enabling, they're chanting, and supporting people who have those kind of views. So, what morals? What exactly makes your criticism valid if you can't even follow what you criticize other people for? That's what marks crazy people, where they're just like double standards and expectations that they can't even or don't care to follow themselves. Are they actually religious, or are they just using it as like an authority shield? As a way to counter any sort of challenge. A psychological tactic to just avoid responsibility and continue to push your own agenda. So, are they really religious? And this is what I mean of like questioning things, not just accepting that because somebody claims to be something, that must be the case. Really actually looking at their actions, looking at things that they support, things that they do or don't do. That really defines our individualistic or our individualism, our ability to just recognize these things, think about them. That's the difference between being a person and being a puppet, being somebody's little pawn. Difference between being a fool and actually being a decent person. And by challenging all these things, you grow as a person. And I think that's where growth really comes from. By sitting there and thinking about these concepts and challenging your own point of view and your own personality and your own views, and confronting yourself on things that you have strong opinions about, like, do I actually follow them myself? And then trying to, as much as possible, being conscious of them as much as possible. And as I mentioned, holding yourself accountable when you're not, and trying to fix it genuinely. It's challenging, but its reward is plentiful and valuable. It makes you less of a crazy person. And for those of you who are confused, the question is, what's the difference between a normal person and a crazy person? Ooh, look at that. That is dry. That's so dry. It's just that time to clean that brush. It's so dry that it's just sticking to its origin, to a certain shape, when it shouldn't. It should be gliding on the paper and returning to its original shape. Well, I am going to end the stream here, guys. I'm actually going to go. I'm going to clean out this brush. But I will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Twitch, to do more to do more drawing. So 8 p.m. it's going to be drawing basics, figure drawing, and then at 9 p.m. it's going to be the project stream. And then on Friday, it's going to be this stream again. At 8 p.m., it will be drawing basics, figure drawing. And at 9 p.m., it's going to be coloring comics. If you guys enjoy this content, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Make sure you check out the Patreon page to see which tiers interest you. You know, send in your work. I'll be happy to stream it online. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon.